Hello Africa and the world, thank you immensely for joining us another time consecrated to News Over for You Television Africa, where we shall debut today in the Central African country of Chad, where Chad's transitional government in less than 48 hours appointed veteran opposition figure Salih Kabzago to head an interim administration of national union. He would replace Albert Pahimi, who resigned to pave way for a new government in the Central African country. The details are in the following reports. Former journalist Kabzago, 75 years of age, ran 4 times for the presidency against Déby's father, Idriss Déby Itno, who was killed during an operation against rebels in April 2021 and was succeeded by a military government headed by his son, a 38-year-old 5-star general. The transitional council had originally declared it would restore civilian rule after 18 months in power, and Déby had at first promised he would not take part in the future elections. But as the 18-month period neared, the nationwide forum staged by Déby reset the clock, pushing back elections onto October 2024. Last weekend, it approved that new 24-month time frame for holding elections, named Déby transitional president for the interim, and declared he could run for the polls. Déby was sworn in on Monday for a new phase of the transition, vowing to name a government of national union within days. The outgoing premier was a 55-year-old political veteran Albert Pahimi Padaki, who had served for 18 months and had also been prime minister under Déby's father, formally resigned on Tuesday alongside his government. We move away from our region to the next and take you to West Africa, where in a bid to restore peace and stability in Nigeria, the Academic Staff Union of Universities, acronym ASU, has reportedly suspended its 8-month strike that began on February 14, 2022 for the non-implementation of the 2009 Memorandum of Understanding reached with it by the federal government of Nigeria. The reports or details in the following reports. The Academic Staff Union of Universities, ASU, has reportedly called for a temporary hold in its 8-month strike that began on February 14, 2022 for the non-implementation of the 2009 Memorandum of Understanding reached with it by the federal government of Nigeria. Though the union is yet to make an official pronouncement, the decision was taken at the end of a National Executive Union meeting which was held at the ASU Secretariat in Abuja on Thursday. The meeting was called by the union to determine its next line of action after its state branches met over a Court of Appeal verdict last week. The Court of Appeal had mandated that ASU end its strike before it can hear its appeal of the ruling compelling lecturers to return to work. The Nigerian youth, mostly students, have been gravely affected by the ASU strike, which brought about a deadlock in the educational system and may lead to long-term disadvantages. According to sources, ASU President Professor Emmanuel Osadeke had said the union could call off its strike in a few days after the overnight discussions with the government. Professor Osadeke said, I quote, "In a few days, we will put this strike to an end. Let all of us working together and the members of the House of Representatives working together put a beautiful end to this thing we have started so that every Nigerian will be proud that we, the universities, can be proud of." ASU President is expected to release an official circular to its members' institutions for the resumption of academic activities in the universities. We move from particular now to general, where history has repeated itself again as 26 African countries voted in favor of the resolution rejecting Moscow's controversial referenda in 4 Ukrainian regions, while 19 others abstained. Fotso has the rest of that story.
South Africa, Sudan, Uganda and Zimbabwe were among the African countries that abstained. Eritrea, which had previously voted to reject a UN resolution condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, also abstained. 3 of these countries hosted Russian diplomatic chief Sergei Lavrov during his tour of the region in July. Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea and Sao Tome were absent from the assembly. The General Assembly of the 193 member states had met in an emergency meeting. It adopted the resolution with 143 votes in favor, with 5 countries against and 35 abstaining, including China, India, Pakistan and South Africa, despite diplomatic efforts by the United States. The 5 states that voted against were Russia, Belarus, Syria, North Korea and Nicaragua. Earlier this month, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba toured Africa in an effort to counter Russia's apparent hold on the continent. The goal was to persuade leaders to support Kiev. He was forced to cut his visit short after Moscow intensified its bombing of Ukraine.
We shall still be talking about the United Nations vote where 7 African countries, mostly in the southern part of the African continent, including South Africa, abstained in the United Nations vote against Russia annexing parts of Ukraine. South Africa, Lesotho, Eswatini, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique and Tanzania are the Southern African Development Community countries which chose to abstain from the United Nations vote in condemning Russia's annexing parts of Ukraine. This comes at a time when African countries are attempting a somewhat non-aligned stance in a divided war scenario which could escalate to a world war. In total, 35 countries abstained from the vote, which 19 were African. We now take you to Benin, where Benin's army has said it fought a terrorist attack in the country's northwest, killing 8 gunmen suspected of operating from neighboring Burkina Faso and Niger. Security forces have faced more than a dozen militant incursions since last year, as concerns continue to mount over the spread southward of violence from the Sahel linked to the Islamic State group and Al-Qaeda. In the early hours of Wednesday, terrorists attempted to infiltrate Matter, a town where they were planning to launch a complex attack, military spokesperson Ebenezer said through the media. We now take you to the northern part of the African continent, where we shall be stopping in Sudan, where a rebel group operating from Sudan's Nubu Mountains has handed over 9 prisoners of the war to Khartoum authorities. The transfer was done on Thursday after neighboring South Tunisia's mediation potentially boosted chances of the 2 sides to reach a final and permanent accord. Take a listen to this report. A rebel group operating in from Sudan's Nubu Mountains has handed over 9 prisoners of war to Khartoum authorities. The transfer was done on Thursday after neighboring South Sudan's mediation potentially boosted chances for the 2 sides to reach a final and permanent accord. The 9 men who were being in captivity of Sudan's People Liberation Movement North, the SPLMN, were handed over to Sudan's ambassador in South Sudan, Jamal Malik, in South Sudan's capital, Juba. They were captured last month after heavy battles in Sudan's South Kordofan province and were being released on humanitarian grounds to return to their families. Aman, the movement's Secretary General, told a news conference in Juba. Sudan's ambassador Jamal Malik told the news conference in Khartoum welcomed the handover of the prisoners, although he said they were not members of South Sudan's armed forces. Sudan's government has in recent years been pursuing efforts to reach accords with rebel groups across the country and end decades of conflict that have displaced millions of people and killed hundreds of thousands. According to reports, some rebels from the country's south and from the troubled western region of Darfur have already signed agreements to cease hostilities. But the faction of Sudan's People Liberation Movement North, led by Abdulaziz Al-Hilu, who has control over significant forces and territory from his stronghold in South Kordofan, has held out. Talks between the rebel and Khartoum, mediated by South Sudan, have so far failed to yield final accords, although progress has been made. The handover of the captive by the movement rebel group signals a good intention from the rebels to continue to engage in talks, said Tut Galaluk Manime, South Sudan's presidential advisor on security affairs, who is heading the mediation team. We wrap up this newscast in our talk health, where the World Health Organization chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, during a virtual meeting in Uganda's capital Kampala, said a clinical trial of vaccines that could potentially combat the Sudan strain of the Ebola driving an outbreak in the eastern country of Uganda could start within weeks. Take a listen to the details. Uganda and the whole of East Africa can now see light at the end of a tunnel in the fight against Ebola. World Health Organization chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said a clinical trial of vaccines potentially combat the Sudan strain of Ebola, driving an outbreak in Uganda that could start within weeks. The East African country declared an outbreak of Ebola on the 20th of September and said infections were being caused by the Sudan strain. So far, Uganda's health ministry has confirmed a total of 54 Ebola cases and 19 deaths, including health workers. There have been worries the spread of the infection in the country could be difficult to contain since there is no vaccine of the strain. For now, the infections are concentrated in a cluster of 5 districts in central Uganda. In a virtual address to a meeting of Africa regional health officials in Uganda's capital Kampala, Tedros said several vaccines are currently being developed that could deal with the Sudan strain. 2 of those vaccines could be put in clinical trial in Uganda in the coming weeks pending regulatory and other approvals from the Ugandan government, he said. Our primary goal now is to rapidly control and contain its outbreak to protect neighboring districts as well as neighboring countries, explained Tedros. Tedros did not give details of the vaccine due for trial, including the names or which firm developed them. Ebola, a hemorrhagic fever, mainly spreads through contact with bodily fluids of an infected person. Symptoms of this viral disease include intense weakness, muscle pain, headaches, and a sore throat, vomiting, diarrhea, and rashes, amongst others. Although it has no vaccine, the WHO has previously said the Sudan strain is less transmissible and has shown lesser fatality rate in previous outbreaks than Ebola Zaire. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you immensely for staying through with us all through today's edition of the newscast over 4U television. As you heard this with our report on health, that we put a dot to this newscast. I have been Jakes Nabuse for presentation. Keep watching 4U television because programs continue.